All right, guys, this is the potato soup demonstration. You're going to use all your mise en place from Knife Skills to do the potato soup. So I have all that set up over here and we're gonna start. So you wanna get everything out and ready to go. Remember, that's mise en place before you start. So I have my pot, I have something to stir with. I choose a wooden spoon, but a rubber spatula would be fine too, as long as it's heat temp. You'll need your stove. And then I have your potatoes. Remember, we stored our potatoes covered in cold water, and you want to do that so they don't oxidize. So you'll drain off all the cold water, which I did. So I have my potatoes here. I'm going to do a double batch because there's a lot of people to feed at Lincoln today. So I'm going to feed them. I have my celery, and remember, celery and carrot you want to cover in an airtight container so they don't dry out. My carrot, remember the carrot's gonna add a little bit of sugar to this. I have my milk, my flour, my butter, and some salt for seasoning. This is a lot of salt, but I'm gonna season with it. So I always cook with a little container of salt near me, so I just pinch and season. You never pour salt in because it's really easy to over salt. And then I have chicken stock. And I just bought chicken stock from Safeway. When we're in the kitchen, a lot of the times here we'll have homemade chicken stock, and if you have homemade chicken stock at home, that's great, but this is a convenient way to do that. So you guys are gonna start your burners on medium heat at home. So medium heat, and you're gonna add in your butter. So I'm gonna let my butter melt down. Once my butter is melted down, I'm gonna add the onions to it. This is an excessive amount of onion. I think the recipe calls for half of a cup, so I'm only gonna use half of this, and I'm doing a double batch, so I'll use a cup of it. This is almost 3 cups of onion. So we're gonna add 1 cup of onion in here, and I'm going to cook those until they're translucent. So translucent means that you can see through them. So onions will cook, I would say, for 3 or 4 minutes. And then I'll add the flour to it. So you can add a little bit of salt to this, and that'll help draw out the moisture in the onions, the water in the onions. The only thing you have to be really careful on with that is adding too much salt, because the soup's gonna cook down, and if you add too much salt, it's gonna be too salty. So I would say add like 3 pinches. So a pinch is 2 fingers and a thumb. So 2 fingers and a thumb like this, 3 pinches. And I'm gonna set that salt over to the side so I don't accidentally add it all in. So I'm gonna saute my onions down and let them get a little bit translucent. You can see it's starting to cook down. So you want them to soften, so you want to start the cooking process on the vegetables a little bit ahead before you add in your liquids, just to give it kind of a jump start. And you're gonna get a little bit of flavor on your onions this way. So it's a win-win. So my onions, fast forward, are translucent. Just like that. I'm gonna add in my carrot, start to soften my carrot and my celery. Remember to get all of that in there, because you spent all that time cutting it, so you don't wanna waste it. So I'm gonna get my carrots and celery in here. Something that a lot of recipes will say at this point is to add the garlic. I don't add my garlic at this point because garlic will burn. Garlic has a lot of sugar in it, so it'll burn faster in these recipes if you add it in the beginning. So I wait until I add the liquid in, until I add the garlic, before I add the garlic, so it doesn't burn and you get more flavor off of it that way. So I'm gonna saute that. I'm gonna saute that for about 5 minutes, just so it softens up the vegetables. And then the recipe calls for 1.5 cups of chicken stock. This is 4 cups, but I'm gonna keep it out just in case I need to thin out the soup. you want the soup, you don't want your soup spoon to stand up in soup. You want it to be soup consistency. You want it to flow nicely and not feel like you need something to drink with it. So I'm gonna add just as much as I need to add to thin out that roux. So we're gonna make a roux in here. If you maybe have never heard that term, so we have the melted fat, the melted butter, it can be any fat, and we're gonna add flour to that. And the flour is gonna help thicken the soup. The potatoes will help thicken the soup as well, but the flour is gonna be the main thickener. So fast forward 5 minutes. I want this to saute and cook down for 5 minutes, or I guess sweat and cook down for 5 minutes. And then I'm gonna add the flour. So I'm gonna sprinkle the flour in. You don't wanna just dump it in. So sprinkle it in and then stir it up. So it's gonna look like this. So I don't know if you can see that or not, but it's gonna look like the vegetables are coated in flour. So the idea now is to cook it until that flour taste cooks out. So roux have different levels of cooking. We're just doing a blonde roux here. So a blonde roux usually takes just a couple of minutes to cook that flour taste out. I always say when it smells like popcorn is a good time to start adding your liquid. You can just cook it for 3 or 4 minutes. Make sure you're scraping the bottom, otherwise it'll burn. So if you guys are doing this at home, try to do it in a stainless steel pan, not something with a coating on the bottom. So something with a coating on the bottom would be something like this, like a Teflon coating. And if you are gonna do that, use a wooden spoon, don't use a metal spoon, because a metal spoon will totally rip that up. And make it hard to like cook eggs and things. Things will, once you use metal on that and you make those metal scrapes in there, all your food will naturally go into those creases and cook and burn. So it's starting to cook and it smells delicious like popcorn. So I'm gonna start adding, I'm gonna add my chicken stock. So like I said, this recipe calls for 3 cups, but I'm not gonna add all 3 of those cups at first. So this is a pint container. So remember, a pint is 2 cups. So I'm gonna slowly add in my stock. In this process, I'll go a little bit faster if you warm up your stock and your milk ahead of time. But you can do it like this. It just takes a little bit longer. So I added in about a cup, and I'm scraping the bottom to get up all those natural sugars and things on the bottom so they don't burn, because this will burn really easily. But check this out. So it's already started to thicken quite a bit. So that's all that flour thickening. So I'm gonna slowly add in the rest of this stock, and I'm probably gonna need at least that other cup. And we'll check that out once this starts to thicken. But you want to keep stirring this, otherwise, remember, it'll burn on the bottom. And you can see my potatoes here. This is why you add water to the top, because it started to oxidize and they'll turn brown. And if you're gonna wait a couple days before you cook these, then they will definitely turn brown and you won't want to use them because the water ends up looking kind of black. Okay. So cold water covered the potatoes. So this is 3 cups and it's still pretty thick, or almost 3 cups. I'm gonna add in this last little bit of it. I'm gonna hold off on adding more chicken stock until I add in the vegetables. But it's thinned out. I'm not too worried about it burning on the bottom. So I'm gonna add in, once it starts to simmer, I'm gonna add in my potatoes. So it shouldn't take too long. That stock is at room temperature. It's not gonna take too long. And remember, you have it at medium heat. So remember, you want to drain that off, and I'm going to add my garlic. So this is the point I'm going to add my garlic. And you can up the garlic. If you really like garlic, you can add more garlic to this recipe. Get that all in there. And see, I'm kind of making a pile of my dishes, so it's easy for me to clean up later, and cleaning as I go. That's kind of the trick with cooking. Clean as you go, and then it's not a crazy mess at the end. So, I'm gonna stir this. It is getting kind of thick, but I'm gonna add my potatoes in and then see what we look like. So I can tell, and I bet if I show you guys, you can tell. So that's what it looks like. And that's pretty thick because we want the liquid to start to cook down those potatoes. We're gonna finish this with the milk, so that'll thin it out a bit. But I'm gonna add this back on here, and I'm gonna add the rest of this stock. If you weren't gonna end up adding the rest of this stock, you guys can save the rest of your stock, because in a few weeks, just cover it really well and then put it in the refrigerator. In a few weeks, we're gonna do squash curry, and you can use it for that. So you don't have to buy it again. So now, I'm gonna bring this up to a simmer. I'm gonna add a few pinches of salt because I know that it's gonna need it. I'm gonna bring this up to a simmer. And remember, we don't wanna pour, because pouring is an easy way to oversalt things. So I added about 3 pinches of salt. I'm gonna bring this up to a simmer, I'm gonna cover it, and I'm gonna let it sit for about 30 minutes. And that doesn't mean go play video games. That means 30 minutes, do your dishes is a good thing to do, but come back to it every now and again and make sure it's not burning on the bottom. It will burn on the bottom if you leave it alone, and that's a bummer to clean out. So make sure, like, every 2 to 3 minutes you're coming back and scraping the bottom and giving it a good stir, and then putting the lid back on. So I'm waiting for this to come up to a simmer, and then I will cover it with a lid. Works. And then I'll come back and show you how to finish it. All right, you guys, I'm back to finish up the soup. So the soup is done. Make sure when you guys are pulling off the lid, something I didn't mention, you want to pull it off with either a dry towel or a pot holder, because as it simmers, it's going to get really hot. Also, make sure every couple minutes you're stirring it. This took 20 minutes on medium heat to get those potatoes softened. I had them pretty small. So remember that 1/2 inch dice, so that's warm. Remember to do what I said. Take it off with this, just so you don't burn yourselves, and set it off to the side. I got lucky and none of mine burnt to the bottom, but it is really thick, so that's thicker than I want it to be. You guys can decide if you want to puree this or not. I'm going to puree mine with a stick blender, which I'll show you what that is. If you don't have one of these at home, you can do it with a regular blender, but make sure you vent the top of your blender. So they have like a little plastic thing in the top of blenders. So only fill your blender up about halfway, half capacity, and then put a dry towel over the top of that vent. But you want to pull out that little plastic piece and put the dry towel over the top, and fold the towel up like this so it doesn't burn your hand. And then blend it on low if you're gonna blend it, or use the pulse button. That's a nice option too. Or if you have one of these stick blenders, they're nice, but not necessary. And if you have neither, then you don't have to blend it. It's actually kind of nice because the potatoes have cooked down quite a bit. And another reason, don't rush this as far as turning up the heat so it gets done faster, because what happens when you do that with potatoes is the outside will get soft, but the inside will never get cooked all the way through. And so it's kind of a bummer. You'll have some raw potato chunks in your soup, and it's kind of gross. So I am gonna puree this a little bit. I saved my milk. I didn't add my milk to my soup as it was cooking. You guys might need to if it needs a little bit more liquid, and that's totally fine. But if you don't need to, I just add it at the end as much as I think it needs to be a good consistency. So for the immersion blender, it needs to be immersed. It gets the name because it needs to be immersed in something. So when you put it together, immerse it, and then plug it in. This is really hot soup, so if it's not immersed, you're going to be wearing that hot soup, and that's a bummer. So usually these have a couple different speeds on them, and you want it immersed. And we'll turn it. Sometimes if there's not enough soup, like you guys did just one, or if you did one recipe, you might have to turn your pot like this so that you can get a good immersion going and get those potatoes blended up nicely. But you can see as those potatoes blend, this is getting, and carrots, this is getting really thick. And that's kind of playing a dangerous game, what I'm doing when you can hear that noise. So at least point it away from you. So I'm not gonna blend it till it's baby food, but I'm gonna get it a little softer. Just make sure the potatoes are mostly blended. Just like that. And then I'm gonna tap it out onto here, and I'm gonna unplug it. So make sure you unplug it before you take it apart. I had a friend that was cleaning one of these, and she's a culinary teacher as well, and it was still plugged in, and she was talking as she was doing it, and she went like this, talking, and she hit the button, and her finger was in there, and she ended up getting like 20 something stitches, but the front row of her demo was wearing blood. So you got to be super careful because these are really sharp blades. Okay, so now is the seasoning part. So when you guys go to season things, you want to make sure you have tasting spoons, which I did not grab. Hold on. So you don't want to keep double dipping with spoons. These 3 spoons will give me 6 options to taste this soup. So once, now 4. Once, and then once on the other end. So I'm gonna taste it right now, but I'm guessing it's gonna need salt. That's the big thing it's gonna need. Actually, it's pretty good on salt. So you don't want to immediately just start adding salt to things. And remember, I need to still add to make it less thick, to thin it out a little bit. I'm gonna add that milk into it because you want it to be about that consistency. Not quite applesauce, but more pourable. Add that in, and then now taste for flavor. So don't just start adding salt. So that's pretty good on salt. I'm gonna add some acid. So we'll talk about the flavors and balance in lecture in synchronous class, but you can add acid in different ways. I like vinegar. So this is just a sherry vinegar, which is kind of sweet, which I think goes really well with this soup, or even just some lemon. So lemons can be kind of hard, so I rolled this on the table. Jeez, sorry. Just like this when it was whole, to kind of extract the juice, help extract the juices and make it softer. So then I'm just going to squeeze it over my hand. I wish I still had that other half. But I'll do a combo of lemon juice. And you can do lemon zest too. So remember in the knife skills demo, I showed you guys how to do lemon zest. Do like 2 swipes on a box grater on the smallest holes, or if you do have a microplane at home, you can use that. Seeing if I put mine away. But remember, you're gonna get more flavor out of the zest of a lemon than you will the juice. But this will just brighten it up. So a lot of the times people, when seasoning and flavoring things, are just like, it needs something, and so there's just salt, salt, salt. It doesn't always need salt. Something like this, usually it just needs acid to kind of brighten it up a little bit. So I can smell that lemon juice, so I'm gonna taste it and see what I think. It brightened it up. I'm gonna add just a few drops of this sherry vinegar just because I like that flavor profile. Be really careful when adding vinegar to things. You want to just add a little bit at a time. And if you're unsure about what you're adding, which I'm sure most of you are that haven't made something like this before, you can take a little bit of it out. So take a little bit of your soup out, put it into a smaller container and season that. And be like, if you're unsure of like, I don't know if I like sherry vinegar, or what would red wine vinegar be like, take a little bit out and try it in here before you commit to the whole pot. And we'll talk about that too when we talk about flavoring and balancing. So added a little of that sherry vinegar. Because I added some more, the rest of that milk, I'm gonna add just a pinch of salt just to keep it balanced, because it was really good before, but then I added more liquid, so you gotta balance it that way. And then I'm gonna use my last spoon and hope I got it. Pretty good. So that's how you flavor and balance soup. Remember, you guys do not have to puree this. It just makes it so the flavors disperse a little bit more. But if you don't, same thing. Don't double dip your spoons and clean up after yourself. Okay, bye.